Beast Wars episode 20, Dark Voyage. I really love this episode. It was a simple concept, and it starts off fairly simple. We have Cheetor, Rattrap, Rhinox, and Dinobot, and they're basically all surveying for Energon. And so, of course, here comes some of the Predacons are typical too. I swear I feel like it's always the same two Predacons that start the episode. At least like probably if I went through and counted, 90% of the time it starts off it's Pterosaur and Waspinator, which makes perfect sense. That's just logical because they're the Flyers. But of course, it was them. They show up, and they basically have this bomb where they launch it, and it lands into like an energon deposit. Like it's basically like it kind of looked like a rocket flare, like a actual firework. And so it lands, and it basically charges up the energon to set off a giant explosion. And it may have been Scorponok. It was a couple days ago when I watched this, so it actually may have been Scorponok because it was just a different weapon, and Scorponok always seems to be the one that used random different weapons. Um, but it was really cool. It starts off simple, and it's like, oh, they thought he missed. And it's like, hey, you missed. It's like, did I? And so of course and they're basically surrounded by energon. It's a giant pool of energon, and it explodes, and then they're blind. So we have four blind Maximals and then two Predacons, and it was Pterosaur and Waspinator because I'm remembering better now. That always seems to be my thing because I watch the episodes so close together. I always end up mixing up who fought who in what episode because there's only like 8 people in the whole 8 Transformers in the whole thing. But it was Pterosaur and Waspinator, and they're going through, and they're like, all right, we defeated the Maximals. We kind of, let's go back to Megatron, and then our Maximals, they wake up. So not only do they find out that they're actually blinded, but they're also incredibly weak because the whole thing with the series is that they can't be maximized for too long. And so they're caught in this giant explosion of energon. Basically, as soon as they wake up, they're freaking out because they're blind, and then they instantly start getting affected by the energon, excess energon. So they all go into maximal form, and then, or into beast mode, and then Rhinox really has to take up his leader in this episode. Everybody's freaking out. Like, they have a really cool scene when they first all realize they're blind, and Rhinox is in the center, and then it kind of pans around him, and so we see Dinobot, and he's freaking out, and Rattrap's freaking out, and Cheetor is behind Rhinox, he's freaking out, and so Rhinox has to yell for them to shut up, and he's like, we can figure this out. Like, it's really crazy, but we can figure this out. And this kind of, in a sense, this kind of piggybacks off of the last episode where it's like, hey, we have to blend our beast forms with our maximal forms. So in this episode, Rhinox kind of talks about how they always take for granted, that their beast mode is kind of just there to save them from the excessive energon, and they need to truly utilize that because he kind of goes through, and they have some stuff where he kind of mentions like, hey, if you listen, you can hear this, or you can smell stuff, and you know where you're going. And it was just really cool. Like, we have these Maximals, and they're, all holding on to each other and freaking out. And there's a great scene when they first get to the jungle, and there's an anaconda in there, and they're freaking out. Like, they hear this noise, and they don't know what's happening because they can't see anything. And Rhinox is trying to tell them, like, everybody calm down. And Rattrap is freaking out. He's like, I can't see. There's something near us. Dinobot starts freaking out, like, are we under attack? And he just starts, like, he tries to take off, and he runs into a tree. They made that kind of comedic because it could have been serious, but they made that kind of comedic where he, like, hit the tree and turned, like, 2D, and he, like, peeled off. But it was a really cool scene, and they're dealing with this rat, or dealing with this snake, and Rattrap almost, bites the dust. He's almost killed because of this rat, or because of this snake coming after him. And he gets launched through the jungle, and then he's getting chased down. And just as he's about to get killed by this snake, Rhinox ends up getting the thing, and he's like, I got you now. And he picks it up with his mouth, and he just flings it across the jungle, which I thought was actually really funny. But it was just an interesting scene. Like, they're going through all this stuff where they can't see anything, and they made a point at the beginning of the episode, and I noticed it as soon as it started. I was like, oh, this is interesting, because they were doing first-person perspectives, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. We get to see it from the eyes of the Maximals. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I wonder why they did that. And then it was only like 2 minutes later when the explosion happened and they went blind. I was like, oh, that's why they did the first person perspective stuff, because it was meant to kind of show exactly how they see, and this is you seeing what they see exactly. And I kind of wish they went back to that, because that was the one thing I felt was missing from the whole episode, honestly, was that they didn't have a scene. Like, it technically would have just been a blank screen, but I would have liked that if they had actual moments within the episode where it's like, this is what they see, and it was just black, and you just hear the voices around them, and it's just a black screen. I think, normally that's kind of like a cheap thing that you can do, be like, oh, let's save costs here. But I felt, considering the episode, it would have been a perfect scene, at least, once, where we get to, since they kind of focused on the first person perspective, I would have loved to have seen that somewhere in this episode. And they kind of do it a little bit, because there's a moment where they go across this waterfall, and Rattrap, it's a very minor thing, but it was still really cool, because of course they can't see, so they have to feel to inspect everything. And Rattrap was like, I think I found a way across the waterfall, but just give me a minute. And so he's like feeling on this log, and he walks across the whole thing, and he's like sniffing it, and he's touching all the different sides to make sure that it's stable. And so he gets to the other side, and he feels like, the log connects to a rock. And so he like shoves the rock to make sure that it won't fall. It was just little stuff like that. I was like, that's pretty cool, and it's really smart, because of course you can't see, so this log falls off the waterfall, you guys might be screwed. So he's like, everything's fine. They're walking across the log, and then Waspinator and Pterosaur end up coming back, because they found out the Maximals were alive, because they were hit with so much energon that they basically show up as walking energon on the radar. So Pterosaur and Waspinator end up going back to finish off the job. They hit the log, all the Maximals fall into the water, and then they all kind of wash up on this beach. And so Pterosaur and Waspinator are going in to kind of finish them off, because like now they're cornered, because they're basically at a cliff face, and it's just basically a giant rock wall. So they have nowhere to go on this beach. And so Rhinox has to calm everybody down, and he's like, hey, you guys need to maximize, because their whole thing is that because of the excess energon, they had to stay in their beast forms even if they were being attacked. It was a little too dangerous to go to maximize. So Rhinox told them, like, you need to maximize. I need you all to envision like a target practice. It's basically like, they showed it, and it was like a 3D range, and it was like, imagine a target range with a target floating right in the center. And they had Rhinox, he kind of went into like the Zen pose where he crossed his legs and like put his hands out and stuff. But they did that because he was the one, everyone else is freaking out still the whole episode. And he was listening, like, okay, I can hear Waspinator and I hear Pterosaur, and I know where they're going to show up. So he was in this sort of Zen state, and everyone else is maximized. They're freaking out, like, alright, how are we going to survive? And so he's telling them basically, like, coordinate. He'll say like Rattrap, and he'll say some coordinates or something, and so Rattrap knows exactly where to aim. And then he'd say fire, they would fire, and they would actually hit their targets. And it was actually really cool. It's like they had a really crazy moment, and they actually ended up working together. They did defeat both Waspinator and Pterosaur, but everyone passed out because they went into the maximized form. And I think Pterosaur was actually able to make like a final pass, and he came at Rhinox, and so he had to maximize as well. And he took him out. He lit him up, and then Optimus was actually finally he was able to find him at that time, because the whole thing is like, we don't know what happened. There's this big explosion. We're trying to find our friends. We can't figure out where they are. The communications, of course, were gone as well. So they had no idea how to get to the team until they got to the waterfall section where, they were just shooting off blasts and stuff. So Optimus made it just in time, and Rhinox was like, I'm really glad you made it. But as soon as he was saying that, he got affected just like everyone else, and then he passed out, and he went into stasis mode as well. But everyone ended up being fine, of course. But it was a really good episode. I really loved this one. I thought it was a nice sort of journey type of episode. It was the Dark Voyage, as it was called. And I liked the way it played out. I thought it was really cool. The scene in the jungle was probably my favorite, because that was the one where they really first got attacked, even though it wasn't, the Predacons. That was when they were first attacked, and they were just in this jungle, and they're like, what is it? Are we being attacked? What's happening? And Dinobot freaks out, and he tries to take off, and he hits a tree, and Rattrap gets like flung way across the jungle, so he's lost and he's like with no one until Rhinox is able to catch up to him, and just everyone's freaking out because they can't see, and Rhinox has to really take on that leader position and say like, hey, if we utilize our beast modes, we can find our way back home. Because that was the big thing. They had to make this giant journey from this random, energon field all the way back to their base. And Rhinox is doing a good job leading them there. Like, hey, this waterfall, I smell it, and this is definitely close to the base. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get across, and so they, landed on the beach and all that. But definitely a fun episode. I really liked it. Like I said, if there was anything missing, it was really just the perspective of them just doing like a black screen and it's someone talking, and it's just the perspective of one of the characters, and all you hear are voices and they don't know what's going on, and they're turning back and forth trying to figure out what's happening. But other than that, it was a really great episode. I really love this one. It's definitely one of my favorites. I was like, man, such a simple little concept, but it just works so well because it's something that they've never faced, so far in the series. So I really loved it. That was a fun episode. Naturally, if you guys have any comments about this or just Transformers in general, please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.